talk about your pain, can't appreciate the sun without acknowledging it rains, right? That's right. So this a moment of clarity, and make sure you always protect your energy. You stay focused and your life gon' be lit. And you are now rocking with Celeste the Therapist. Let's go.
All right. Hi, guys. All right, let me fix this up. We are live, and let me just set up on Instagram. And for people that are watching me on the replay, my name is Celeste. I am a therapist from Boston, and I come on to talk about things that we all go through, and then thinking about ways that we can work on dealing with it. Today, we're talking about grieving relationships. So I'm streaming live on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and unfortunately, TikTok does not, I can't show my screen on TikTok because it's not embedded in the same system that I'm using. So I need to be able to look at Instagram so that I can see the comments because I can't see it here. So if people are watching me on replay, just so you know, I have a ton of podcast episodes that I've done over the years. And if you go to celestetherapist.com, you can find them. I've been podcasting since 2018, July. But even prior to that, I would come online, talk about mental health, because a lot of times people don't understand that they're not alone or that it's challenging to deal with some of the things that we go through. And so that's why I do what I do. And grieving relationships is something that a lot of people don't realize that they're grieving, but they are. I think a lot of times when we talk about grief, we talk about it from a standpoint of when people pass away, when they're no longer here on earth. And so I just want to show you, I'm going to show you kind of like what we're going to be talking about today. So today, what is grief? The importance of acknowledging and processing grieving relationships, understanding the reason for cutting off communication, seeking closure and healing in the absence of reconciliation, setting boundaries to protect your emotional well-being, and seeking support from therapy or support groups, and then kind of moving forward with acceptance and self-care. So that's kind of the direction that we're going to go. And so when you think about grief, I guess the first thing I want you to understand is kind of like, what is it? And I think working definitions are important. So when I looked it up, grief is something for people that are listening on the audio podcast. If you go to YouTube or Facebook, search Celeste the Therapist, you could find these episodes where you can get the video component. I'm a very visual learner, so that's why I like to use visuals when I'm talking about things. So what is the true meaning of grief? It says grief is the natural emotional response, natural, like, because we're human. Grief is the natural emotional response to the loss of someone close, such as a family member or a friend. Grief can also occur after a serious illness, a divorce, or significant losses. Grief often involves intense sadness and sometimes feelings of shock and numbness, or even denial and anger. So that's kind of the working definition of grief. And the fact that it's a natural response and people don't even realize it. And if you're not going to a funeral, a lot of people would not consider what they're struggling with or what they're dealing with as grief. And one of the things that we have all grieved as a collective during the pandemic, remember the pandemic took place, and across the world, people were having the same experiences. It was kind of the first time I feel like, I've been in this field for a long time, but the first time since being in the field that I was experiencing literally the same thing as the people that I was talking to and helping them process. And so for people in the healing realm and therapists, practitioners, coaches, these people, I had a lot. I was like, wow, we're really like in this together. It was like I feel like the first time something like that's ever happened. And so we had to grieve the life that we knew. and work on accepting the new situation that we were in, that we really nobody understood, right? So when you think about grief, right, think about the fact that it comes with a lot of emotions. And I want to show you this this kind of stages of grief, right? Because I think so for people that are listening, the stages of grief are denial, anger, depression, bargaining, and acceptance, right? And I feel like you see on the left where it's just this like nice linear line. Okay, I'm in denial, I'm angry, I'm depressed, I'm bargaining, and then I move into acceptance. I feel like that's what people think about grief. They look at it as something that happens in a kind of linear state, where the reality is that the diagram on the right, where it shows everything kind of being really discombobulated, that's literally what grief can look like. It not can, it does. It looks like you being all over the place with your emotions. Maybe one moment you are accepting it, then tomorrow you may feel like you're in denial or you're bargaining. These are some familiar experiences that people have had but don't recognize what's going on. Sometimes 6 months, a year later, you cut off the person, and then you're like in a state, and you're like, you're being kind of mean to yourself for feeling how you're feeling. And a lot of the reasons I think why we are so mean to ourselves when we're feeling certain things is because we don't normalize the emotions that we go through when we're going through different changes of our lives, right? We tend to go through a lot of different changes. We go through a lot of different things. And I always say, like, because we don't have the tools to deal with the things that we're going through, we really psych ourselves up. We beat ourselves up for something that we literally don't know, we don't understand. So that's kind of what grief is. That's the stages of grief, kind of like what you go through. And when I think about stages, it's not a linear process, it's like all over the place. So understanding the importance of acknowledging grief, thinking about cutting off communication. So in this segment, we're talking about grieving people that are still here on earth, and not people that are no longer here in this realm, but people that are here. Thinking about the reasons why you're cutting off the communication is important, because sometimes it could be a family member, it could be a friend that you've grown up with or you've known for a long time. And the reality is that the relationship doesn't work. Maybe at one point in your life, the relationship was something that worked for the space you were in. And sometimes, there's verbal abuse, right? There's misunderstandings. There's so many different things that go on in relationship dynamics that, because we have history with the people in our lives, I think we tend to continue to allow them to stay, even if it doesn't warrant it, right? So if you're in the process of you've had to cut somebody off and you're working on changing what that looks like, where it's like, I can't no longer be friends with this person, or I can't, like, they're my mom, or they're my dad, or they're my sibling, or they're my cousin, or they're my whatever it is, right? Because regardless of if it's a blood relative or somebody that is a friend, sometimes that relationship is hindering your growth. And a lot of times you can say, like, oh, but I've known them for a long time, but how is that benefiting you? How is it helping you? And so sometimes, like, having to cut off communication and really being logical and helping yourself understanding why. The next thing I want you to think about is seeking closure and healing in the absence of reconciliation. It would be nice to have a nice reconciliation session with somebody and talk things through. The reality is that everybody's not in that state. Everybody's not going to want to talk about it. Some people may even stay in denial or say or try to gaslight you when you do want to try to figure out how we can fix this relationship. And some people may not be ready to do that, and that's their prerogative. I say, when people, some, and this happens a lot when one person's in therapy or one person's on a healing journey, and the dynamic, and the other person's not. You start seeing things in your relationships. And I tell people, because I've been doing this for so long. I warn people as they're changed, and I say, hey, just so we're clear, The relationship dynamics that you're seeing, you've always allowed it. You set up the system for it to be that way. Hey, Pina. Oh, hey, Fahad. You set up the system for this relationship to look like it looked, right? So, take accountability for what you've allowed over the years. Maybe you was in a space where you were dealing with a lot of trauma, and your way of coping was to party, and that was your partying friend, right? Like there's so many different dynamics where maybe you're not in that space anymore and the person is still trying to drag you out, and you're not like, I don't want to do that. I want to do these other things. And then a lot of times people will be upset with the other person because it's like, why do they want me keep doing this? I said, well, you've always allowed it, or you've always said yes. A lot of times people have always said yes to things that they may not have wanted to do, but they struggled with saying no, right? So many different reasons why we have allowed certain relationships to go on as long as it's gone on. Sometimes it's mimicked our upbringing, right? Where you've always had to be the go to person in your life culturally. Sometimes culturally, like some systems, people are the go to person. And so in friendship dynamics, you find yourself doing that. In work relationships, you find yourself doing that, and you decide to work on yourself and recognizing like this does not work for me anymore. Understand the people in your life are going to struggle with that, right? The people that like will understand your journey and be like, you know what, that makes sense, good for you, like they're going to still be there. But you're going to have a handful of people that are not going to accept that, or are not going to want that. And so if that's the case, you have to make the decision to change what you're allowing. And changing what you're allowing may means I have to like not deal with certain people anymore. So it's important to remember that, right? Because it's interesting as we're changing and we don't realize like, oh yeah, we have changed. Like 'cause people say, oh, Celeste, you changed. And I'd be like, why did you say I changed? I'm still Celeste. But I had to think about it, and I was like, you know what? I have changed, right? I have started saying yes to me. I've made appointments with myself that are non-negotiable, right? Before, appointments with myself were negotiable. Like, oh, it's just a pencil. Like, it's fine. Yeah, that's fine. I can do that, or I can be here, or I can be there. And the more I recognized how much that didn't work for me, I had to start saying no to other people and yes to myself. And that didn't work for people. And that's okay. I've made peace with that, right? Like that's part of the process. So as you're grieving relationships, we started with understanding what grief is, understanding the cycles of um, understanding the cycles of grief, like what that looks like. And then we talked about the importance of seeking closure and healing in the absence of reconciliation. The next thing I want to share is the importance of setting boundaries to protect your emotional well being. Boundaries are in place for to protect you, right? Um, my friend Sean Marshall, he had a quote where he said, boundaries exposes the toxicity in relationships. I'll never forget that quote. I always say it all the time. Boundaries will expose the toxicity in relationships. And if you are not clear on what your boundaries are, you'll find yourself struggling with this process. And boundaries are something, especially if you didn't grow up in a household where boundaries were put in place, or where you were taught like it's okay to say no. There's some, cultures, it's like you always have to hug people, you always have to give somebody a kiss, or like even if you felt uncomfortable, where even as a child, you get everything, like it's nothing bad that's happening, but you were taught that what you wanted or what you need didn't matter. So you may struggle with boundaries. For people that may struggle with boundaries, understand a lot of times it started in the home. And it was not about blaming people, right? Because some of this stuff is cultural, some of this stuff has just been passed on, where people are oblivious as to how it will affect others later on, or how it will affect their child. I talk about this stuff so people, as they are trying to make peace with their life or accept where they are so they can move forward, I think it's helpful to understand like why this stuff was created, like how it started. And so if you're on this journey of trying to grieve people and reposition the way that you allow them in your life, you're going to have to set some hard boundaries, like saying no, right? And I just said, like, I say yes to myself now and no to others, but it's not like 100%. I'm always telling people no, right? If I have the capacity to do it, then I'm going to do it. And I think a lot of times we don't understand our capacity, right? Because it was never taught. So understanding your capacity and understanding your boundaries so that you're able to stick to what you say. Because you could say, like, you know what, I'm going to go, today was a hard day. I'm just going to use this as an example. Thank you, Dee. Today was a hard day, right? I'm going to go home and I'm going to relax and watch Netflix and like have some ice cream. Like, you already have it planned. Like, I'm about to go do this thing. And then somebody calls you and they be like, hey, I need blah, 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 blah. Immediately you forget that you just said you was tired. You forget that you already had a plan for what you wanted to do. And you was like, oh, okay, all right, I got you. I'm going to go get you, right? And we can do X, Y, and Z. When what you really needed, you needed that alone time. People don't realize, like, some of the struggles you're having is because you're not even making time to be with yourself to understand what's going on so you can recuperate and replenish, right? If you're driving all the time, let's say your gas gauge isn't working, you know how it tells you when it's about to be empty and full. Like, a lot of y'all gas, your gauges is not even working. You can't even see it. Like, it's just not there. So you literally will wait till you run out of gas before you replenish. That's just not okay. That's not the way to operate in life. Like, if you're over 18 and an adult, like, you have agency over what you choose. And a lot of times we're choosing to help others than to help ourselves. Sometimes the way that we're treating ourselves, if a friend or a family member or somebody that we love came to us and was like, hey, this is what I'm doing. Like, I'm really tired and I'm exhausted today. And my plan was to go and do this. But do you think I should go do this? And you would be like, no, you should go home and chill and do what you say you're going to do. We would literally say that to people easily. It would roll off our tongue like it's nothing, right? But when it comes to ourselves, we forget, like, why can't I just have that same energy for myself? And so that's when you have to teach yourself, right? And the way you're teaching yourself how to have that energy for yourself, it's very uncomfortable. This emotion chart that I'm about to pull up right now, checking in with your emotions and how you're feeling. Like, you may even feel guilty for saying yes, right? I'm going to let you know right now, you more likely, yes, will feel guilty for saying yes. And I also want to let you know that that's okay. You can feel guilty about what you're doing and still do what you need to do. A lot of times we tell ourselves that we'll tell ourselves that, oh my gosh, I feel so guilty. I'm just going to go ahead and help this person, right? Okay, you go help that person. The guilt's not there anymore, but now you're overwhelmed. Now things feel really hard for you because instead of you honoring what you said you were going to do for yourself, you let the guilt, which is a human response to life, right? You let that take over, and then you do it based off of that emotion. Someone says, but as women, especially as a Black woman, we are taught to prioritize others. Definitely guilt ridden. Yes. So I just shared how sometimes the family systems created it, but like someone's saying on TikTok, sometimes it's even society. It's even the way we were raised. A lot of companies, and you talk about Black women, I think about a lot of companies, a lot of the ways that they do well. There's Black women behind the scenes. You may not see them. And my main audience is Black women, and I know that they have so much work on their plate, right? I went to a conference and I can't think of this lady's name, but she talked about invisible labor, right? We do so much and we don't even recognize that we're doing it. And if you actually sat down and wrote down all the things you're doing, it exceeds 24 hours in a day, right? Because you're not factoring in your sleep. You're not factoring in your self-care. You're literally doing things that are impossible and feeling like you're not enough or you're not doing enough. And that's never okay, right? And so if you're not creating boundaries for yourself, because when you create boundaries for yourself, it's not just for some of these like relationships you have, whether intimate relationship, friendships, or family, it's even for the workplace. If you're not creating boundaries for yourself in the workplace, you're going to allow that job to drive you ragged, create so much dysfunction in your life and your body, right? So many people, their bodies are suffering. They're on medication because of the stuff that's happening at the job, right? And that's not okay. And because you're doing this alone, you're in your own head about it. You don't realize like that's what's happening, but it's really important. If you have boundaries for yourself, if you know that gauge, the gas gauge I just shared, like if you think of if you think of your the ways in which you function and your cup, like I'm about to drink this water. Hold on. Mm. If you think about like how full your cup is, right? This for people that are listening, I have a water bottle. If you think about how full your cup is, a lot of people like it's draining. It's literally you're going on E and you're like, okay, yeah, I'll do this, right? And you know, if you were almost on E in your gas tank, you're gonna go stop at the gas station, even though I'd be cutting it kind of close sometimes with the gas because I hate pumping gas, but that's not the point. But in real life, when you think about yourself, I love using analogies because I feel like it drives the point home for people. If you are on E almost and you're not realizing it because you don't understand your gauge, you're gonna find yourself always like being impulsive about something. Some of those addictions that you may be struggling with, I talked about that last week, about emotions and how a lot of times we're responding off of the emotions and some of the addictions that we're struggling with. A lot of times it's because you don't understand yourself because you get so drained and then you just find yourself like, you know what, I just want to escape. And like I'm always going to say, you can't cut off one side of you, right? You cannot say like, I just want to numb this pain and not find yourself numbing the joy, right? Like I think that's important to understand. A lot of times like food is an easy way to people can find themselves addicted because it's easily accessible, it's acceptable. Like having food, there's no stigma around food. But food is one of those things, especially in America, that a lot of people are addicted to. They're drowning their sorrows and not recognizing it. So really being mindful of creating boundaries for yourself, because it's going to help protect your emotional well-being. Number 6, seeking support from therapy or support groups. So as you're working on grieving, right? Because you'll be surprised you're not the only one. Some people it's family. You're grieving family relationships, and you know, in some cultures, that's not norm. Like, you really gonna cut off this person? Like, how are you gonna do that? Like, believe me, like I've had to do it. And a lot of times you feel like a black sheep, or you find yourself feeling like, what's wrong with me? Because nobody in your family dynamic understands it. Guess what? Nobody in your family dynamic has to live with the stress and the pressure that you're going through dealing with certain people in your life, right? And I always say, when you're the first person to work on being functional in a dysfunctional system, they're looking at you as dysfunctional because you're the one that is doing something different, right? Like, I think educating yourself about this process will allow you to keep going forward with the process. A lot of times we feel dysfunctional because we're trying to be functional in a dysfunctional system. And then we find ourselves saying, you know what, let me just go back. Because the reality is it is a lonely journey when you're trying to work on yourself and nobody else is going with you. It's literally a lonely journey. When you've been dealing with so much dysfunction for so long, you do have people in your life, whether they work for it or not, they're still there. And then when you find yourself coming out of it, right? Coming out of that position, now you seem like the oddball. And so that's okay. It can seem like whatever, but at the end of the day, I promise you, like if you had to choose, do you want like quantity? Do you want to just have a bunch of people in your life and no peace? Or do you want to have quality and peace, right? People are going to choose quality and peace, right? Yeah, I may not have all these friends I may not have all these people in my life, but peace of mind is something that you can't purchase. I don't care how much money somebody has, they can't purchase peace of mind. We have so many things in America. We have so much product. We're always selling something, always, right? But for some reason, so many people are struggling with so much depression and so much anxiety. And a lot of times we think it's because of what we don't have, right? So we're going out and we're purchasing more, right? But it's not about the things we don't have. It's about the way that we're thinking about things, the way that we're framing things. I remember this, what is his name? Gary Vaynerchuk. He's a marketing person. And he said, you know, I meet a lot of people, with money and stuff. And I remember having this conversation and someone said, um, oh, I have this little cottage. I stayed in a town that I lived at. And then someone else was like, really? Because they have like two houses, or, they have all of these things. But then as the other person with the cottage, the person with the little cottage and, living within their means, they're really happy. They have peace, right? And you'll be surprised. People with all of these things that you may think you don't have, and that's the reason why you're being held back. You'll be surprised that there's no joy, there's no peace there, right? Think about all of the if you watch reality shows. I don't really watch as many as I used to watch when they first started, but I see the headlines of them going to jail for fraud and whatever, all this money stuff, right? A lot of the stuff they're going to jail for is not because they killed somebody or they did something to someone else. The stuff they're going to jail for has to do with like money and fraud. And I think about that, and I ask myself, I wonder if it was even worth it, right? Because you start off on this platform and you're showing all of these things, and you want to keep up, and so in order to keep up, you have to like do more fraud, and it's kind of like we don't realize how a lot of times the things that we feel down about, right? There's some real things happening, but there's a lot of other things. It's because we're not being able to be in the moment and appreciate what we have, right? So that's something to really think about as you're on this journey of like really understanding grief. So seeking support from therapy and support groups is like embracing the people that are going to understand, right? And so that might be online, that might be like a podcast that you're able to listen to. You'll be surprised the more you start to look for your tribe, right? When you start to look for your tribe, you'll find yourself finding it. Your mind will allow you to find it. The same way if you say like, oh, life sucks and I don't have anything, your mind will keep showing you how you don't have anything, because that's the direction you're taking it, right? So if you are finding yourself wanting to break away from some relationships, and you're struggling, you want to work on grieving and recognizing like, you know what, I need to start this process. Start to be around other people that get it, right? Because your family may not get it, and that's okay. It's sad, right? You're going to have your moments of sadness. I think that never goes away, especially if you've always wanted to have your family in your life, right? You're going to have moments, but you don't have to let it take over. You don't have to compromise your wants and your needs because they're not willing to go along with you, right? Individual therapy is great. Like there's great coaches, there's great somatic practitioners, the body, right? A lot of times we don't understand that we're holding so much in our body when it comes to trauma and pain, right? I'll do a session on that because a lot of times, especially in the Black community, it can show up physically for us, right? We don't have the textbook version of some of the things that we talk about when we're talking about depression or when we're talking about anxiety. It's not that we're stuck in bed, right? We may not be finding ourselves crying all the time. We may find ourselves feeling some back pains. We might find ourselves having some migraines, right? We might find ourselves overworking or working more, trying to, build more, go to school more, right? There are some people that are addicted to trying to get degrees because they're trying to find value in themselves and they don't realize it. So really finding your tribe as you're working on grieving relationships, especially, if it's not traditional for your culture or your community. You may feel odd, but remember, you're working on peace, right? That's really important. The last thing I want to say about this idea of grieving relationships is moving forward with acceptance and focusing on self care. Acceptance is something that can help you with any process that you're trying to make peace with. A lot of times, like, especially let's say we're talking about trying to grieve relationships and we haven't accepted, you know what, my mom's always going to have an opinion about what I do. I'm not doing anything bad. I haven't, like, I'm not a lawyer or a doctor, but I'm in a job that I actually love, right? I'm in a career path that I actually love. I'm in a relationship that I actually love, and she is not going to accept it. I have to accept that she's not going to accept it, so that I'm not finding myself continuing to be struggling with her lack of acceptance, right? Like, I think a lot of times we want to, like, force people to understand us or, like, make it work, and you don't have control over the other person, right? So when you think about acceptance, when you think about that word, some of your emotional turmoil can really change if you just accept, you know what, this is how this person is. When I was working in nonprofit, I shared over the years, I got demoted, then I went and got my license. Then I realized, like, a lot of the nonprofits were the same. And so I decided, like, I'm going to create my own practice. But it took a year for me to get to that point where before I was able to really venture out and do it full time. Like, I had to plan for it. But the acceptance of the fact that, you know what, a lot of these nonprofits are the same really helped me, where I was still able to work there, but I didn't feel like I was struggling with the systems and the way it was. Because I told myself, that's not my system. I don't have stock in this job, right? Like, I need to figure out what's going to work for me. So it wasn't like overnight. Like, I was like, oh, all nonprofits are the same. Like, I'm just gonna leave. No, I still got bills to pay. I didn't do that. But what I did do was I created a plan. And a lot of times I think we struggle with acceptance, and then we continue to, like, go against the grain and find ourselves struggling because, we haven't accepted what is. And I think if you can accept what is, it can help you with your healing process, whatever the situation is, especially when we're talking about another party. You will never be able to change or make anybody come to terms with you or accepting you. You can only control what you allow in your relationships. And I'm even talking about work, family, even with your kids, right? Thinking about, what am I allowing? A lot of times people be like, well, why do they treat me this way? Or why is this the way it is? And it's like, you need to reframe that statement and ask yourself, like, why am I allowing this to happen? Or how am I showing up in this relationship where they think it's okay to treat me this way? A lot, when I talk to people and they talk about some dynamics in their relationships, and I'll be like, you know what, that shows me the way that you said this, and it was like, oh, but I still need this. It shows me that you always overextended yourself, or you never had boundaries, right? So it's not them. Like, why are they keep asking me? Why are you keep allowing it? Like, sometimes we have to change the way that we're framing things to help us get through some of the situations that we're going through. So when it comes to grieving, right? If you want to move forward, acceptance is important. And as you're accepting the situation, working on self-care, right? And anybody who knows me, self-care is not about, like, going to get this done and spend this money. If you have it, great. I love that for you, but that's just not the reality for certain people. So I really want you to, like, reframe and rethink about what what self-care is, right? And if you have any questions, you can ask questions before we go, because I'm about to wrap up. But you can think about what self-care is in a practical way, right? So, you know what? Like, I'm always rushing for work, and it doesn't feel good, because when I get in traffic, I get overwhelmed and I start my day overwhelmed. Let me go to bed on time. Let me set my alarm. Even when the alarm goes off and I want an extra 15 minutes of sleep, if you sacrifice that immediate gratification, because I'm actually 15 minutes of sleep, you're feeling good, but then you pay for it on the other end, right? So it's kind of like, you know what, let me get up, even though I don't feel like it, because that's self-care, getting up on time. So now you're driving in work, you hit that red light, it's okay because I'm good, right? You hit that red light when you late, you be like, dang, why the light change? You start talking to yourself about something you can't change, you're stressing yourself out. So really being mindful about the way that you are showing up for yourself. Because a lot of times the way that you've allowed certain things to happen over years is because you ain't showing up for yourself. So guess what? If you ain't showing up for yourself and other people are like treating you a certain way, it mimics what you're giving to yourself, right? So if you're trying to change the dynamics in relationships and realizing like it's not going to work for you, if you start taking care of yourself, it's actually going to be really hard for you to allow somebody to do something different than what you're already doing for yourself, right? When you're getting up on time, when you're able to like relax, go into work in a space like that, when you're going to bed on time, right? When you're saying yes to yourself and showing up in the different areas that you haven't showed up before. I want to just show you really quick this wellness wheel, right? These are the different areas of our lives: um, spiritual, emotional, environmental, financial, intellectual, occupational, physical. And if you Google wellness wheel for people that are listening on the audio podcast, you'll find different variations of it. But, and you know, if you think about finances, if you are always like swiping and just because you impulsive, oh, this looks good. But if you're trying to work on your financial wellness and you're finding yourself saying no to this thing, right? That's self-care, right? Like we have to really be mindful on how we're looking at self-care, because society paints a picture of this like nice, pretty little like massage. Massage is cool. Don't get me wrong. You know what I'm saying? Like getting your nails done is cool. Like those things are great. But if you don't have it, I also want you to think about other things. Even if you have it, that's great that you have it, but really thinking about other things that allows you to not be on high alert all the time. You know, a lot of times, you know, our systems was created so that when something happens, we can run. You ever heard of somebody like picking up a car or doing something miraculous because the endorphins was going? And so these things are happening in our body and we're able to like, okay, get out the way or do these things, but we never go back to baseline. Animals, like their prey comes and they come to try to attack them and then they get them back and then now they're safe, they're able to go back to baseline. Humans are the only species, we can create a way that we're finding ourselves overwhelmed and stressed out just by the way that we're framing things, right? We could frame things a certain way where there's no danger in front of us, but our system is reacting like it's in danger. And if our system stays on high alert 24/7, guess what? Eventually it starts to break down. A lot of some of the physical ailments you're having is because your system is really tired of being on high alert or living on edge, living anxious all the time, right? And so you're going into the doctor as you get older with these different ailments that the doctor can't tell you where they came from or how they started, right? They don't go to school to talk about trauma or talk about how we've been living our life and how it's affecting our life physically, mentally, and everything else. That's not what they go to school for. But I'm here to tell you that literally that's what's happening. When you find somebody that's your age, they're still young, and it's like, oh, they just died, or they just had a heart attack, or they just had a stroke. Guess what? Their system is tired of living like that. So, you know, my goal in doing these streams is to help educate you, because a lot of times our lack of knowledge is what's keeping us stuck, right? Sometimes I work with some people, I'm like, as soon as I like help them make the connections and do this thing, it's like they're on it. They just needed that, like they just needed that connection, right? And so mainstream media won't tell you, because nobody gets paid if you learn how to like navigate life in a way where you don't feel dependent on purchasing things, right? Where you can just be in nature and be good and be fine and feel good. Like society's not going to tell you that. But my goal is to help share that knowledge. So if this was helpful for you, make sure you share it with somebody that you love, share it on your platform. These episodes are also on my audio podcast. So every single Wednesday, I drop these episodes on my audio podcast. So if you are a listener of podcasts, you can actually listen to it. If there's a topic idea that you want me to discuss on these Wednesday episodes, all you got to do is go to my website, celestethetherapist.com, and you will find a link there for you to be able to do that. And if you go to my website, you will find a slew of podcast episodes that I've done where I'm talking to people that are empowering other people. And then you'll find these episodes that I do by myself. So I will see you all next Wednesday. Thank you so much for rocking out with me, and I will talk to you later.